Today, we are talking about sales and management strategies, how to sell more in today's economy. And if you stick around until the end, you'll hear a great story about hanging out at Necker Island, which is Sir Richard Branson's private island in the Caribbean. Our guest here today just recently got back from there, so we're going to hear all about it. And our guest, his name is Brian Will. I'll tell you more about him in a second, so stay tuned. All right, 3, 2, 1. All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of this show. You know, if you've listened before, you know that every week I talk to smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs of all kinds of companies. We've had Netflix here, Kinko's YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard, Grubhub, you name it. We've had Quicken. So check out the archives. There's some great episodes there. And of course, this episode brought to you by Rise 25, where we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with Done For You podcasts and content marketing. And you can learn about how we do it and what we do at rise25.com. All right. And my guest here today is Brian Will. He's an expert in sales and management consulting. He's the author of a number of different books, including The Dropout, Multimillionaire, and No, The Psychology of Sales and Negotiations. And also, and I love this, the title of his first book was I Give the Dumb Kids Hope. And so over the span of about 35 years, Brian has founded 7 companies across 4 industries with a combined worth peaking at over $500 million. And currently he owns restaurants in Atlanta and manages a real estate business in Georgia and Florida, which he uses his plane to fly back and forth to, which is a lot of fun. So Brian, such a pleasure to have you here today. And I love to start everyone by harking all the way back to their childhood and hearing the stories of the little entrepreneurial side hustles that people had as a kid. And you got the idea to sell suckers or lollipops from buying them down to your local store. Tell us all about it.
Hey, John, thanks for having me on The Rising Entrepreneur. This is actually a good story based on your title, but I was in the 8th grade. We had a tiny laundromat in the little town I grew up in. I went in one day and realized that they sold these giant suckers for a dime. I took one to school the next day and everybody wanted one of those suckers. And I thought, I got a business here. You know, I'm 14 years old. So I went down to the laundromat the next day and bought like 4 suckers, brought it back to school. And at lunchtime, sold them for a quarter of a piece. Cost me 40 cents. I made $1. And I thought, man, I got a good business here. And so I kept doing that until somebody accidentally figured out where I was getting the suckers for a dime and put me out of business. So,
No. Did they undercut you and start selling them for 20 cents or something like that?
well, the funny story is, it was my best friend and he said, we're going to go in on this together. And I said, no, this is my business. I'm going to do it. And then so he just went and bought the suckers and came in and started selling them for 20.
Oh,
You know,
man.
that's actually a good business lesson because if your business doesn't evolve, somebody else potentially is going to come right behind you and cut you right out of it. So
Right.
good business lesson to learn at 14 years old.
Maybe even your best friend.
Maybe even your best friend.
Yeah. Hold your friends close, right?
Yeah,
So you end up going on and you actually started selling for Amway at 18 years old. I don't know many 18-year-olds that start selling for Amway, and you actually got some good lessons from that experience.
I did. I was working at a pizza place and one of the managers of the pizza place talked me and my girlfriend into joining. And I tell you, I came from a rough childhood. There was no positive motivation in my household growing up. And, you know, I never made any money in that business, but was introduced to hundreds of books and mentors and people who had been successful who would tell me how I could do something. You know, I'd never had that in my life. So it really changed my life, I'll tell you. Never made any money, but from a positive mental attitude, changing my life and giving me drive, I'm glad that I went through that experience with them.
Did they have, a lot of those types of businesses have these kind of raw conferences where you get together
Oh,
and
yeah.
inspirational speakers and stuff like that. So they had those sorts of things.
They did. Yep. And I
Yeah.
went to all of them. I was a junkie for a while. And it was something I needed to, just like the military was something I needed to do because I needed discipline. That was also something I needed to do because I needed to learn that I was capable and worthy of being more than I was at that age. So
Yes.
it was good for me.
And thank you for your service with that, by the way. So you served in the Ohio National Guard and then later in the Georgia National Guard. And there's a funny story about how you ended up serving in 2 different states' National Guards, which you don't see very often. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I was in the Air National Guard right out of high school in Ohio, and then I moved down to Georgia. But I really wanted to fly, and I did not go to college, and the Air Force would not let me fly. But there were some guys there that said, "Hey, man, there's an Army base down at the other end of the runway. If you go down there, I'll bet you they'll let you fly because they'll let anybody fly." So I literally drove down there at lunch one day and introduced myself to them and said, I want to fly with you guys. And they said, you're in. So I switched from the Air Force to the Army and spent 4 years flying OV-1 Mohawks for the Georgia Army National Guard.
Wow, very cool. And now you have your license and you have you fly around privately as well. I'm actually really fascinated by this because my father was in the Air Force, my grandfather was in the Army Air Corps, which became the Air Force, flew
Yep.
B-17 pilots during World War II, planes during World War II. And you've got this background in the military, and you also served in the Georgia General Assembly, House of Representatives, and now you serve on your sorry, I might have combining that with someone else's background, but you
Yep.
you serve
I'm
on
just
your local
city council.
city
Yep.
council, sorry. And it's sometimes people think that public service and military work are very different from entrepreneurship, but sometimes I think, having served in government myself and not having served in a uniform, but being, the child of people who have been in the military, that there can be some similarities. In other words, discipline is a great, character that can help with entrepreneurship. But for you, what are the connections you make between your military background, your government service, and how it kind of connects to the entrepreneurial work that you've done?
It's a little bit of the discipline. It's also learning and understanding how to operate in a diverse field of people, if that makes sense. So, like, we have 7 city council people, and we're all different. So, if you can learn to operate within a diverse uh, group of 7 people and still get things accomplished, much like in the military, you had people from all over the place, all different education levels, from officers down to privates. You got to learn to execute, operate, and be successful in that type of environment. And by the way, that's exactly what we do as an entrepreneur. We have to be able to operate with different customers, with different employees, with executives, with low level technicians. I should not have said low level. That was a bad thing. I apologize. Um, but yeah, you need to be able to operate at all levels to be successful.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, there's people that have different educational backgrounds. There's people that have different, amounts of wealth or upbringings. Some people come from extreme poverty and end up in the military. Yeah, it's kind of a great point. And you end up starting a landscaping company, which you grew and was really successful, in your words, until it wasn't.
Until it wasn't.
But let's start with the success first. Why was it successful in the early days?
I've always had a knack for being able to build companies all the way back to when I was 21 that didn't require me to actually be doing all the work. And I call this ambitiously lazy. I'm very ambitious that I'm willing to work really, really hard, but I work really, really hard at figuring out how not to have to work really, really hard. So we call
Yeah.
this ambitiously lazy. And so I built a company that was kind of running on autopilot, and I was thinking of selling it. And the broker that I was talking to said, hey, why don't you franchise it? And so we did, and we ended up selling 7 franchises, and we had 4 or 5 more rolling, and that company was really going big and strong. The problem is that 80% of our revenue against all the franchises was done under one big general contractor that was doing big multifamily construction work. So you're doing construction and maintenance. And they brought in a new vice president of construction, and he wanted to bring his son in to run the landscaping division, and they fired us. And
Wow.
unfortunately, we had operational overhead and infrastructure big enough to manage all of their business, but they were 80% of my business. So when they went away, we still had all this infrastructure, overhead costs, leases, loans, trucks, equipment, and we couldn't make the payments on them anymore. So that was our first big mistake. We were too wrapped up in one customer. The second
Mm.
mistake was we didn't have any cash set aside, no capital to cover us in case of a problem, which this was a big problem. And so that first month, I couldn't make payroll. I couldn't make the payments on the invoices. I ended up bouncing like 130 checks that month to our suppliers, which of
Mm.
course then they all fired me as a customer.
Mm.
The bank charged me $3,000 in check fees, and everything just kind of collapsed on itself. I was 29 years old. I had a 3-year-old that had open heart surgery coming up, and
Mm.
my whole world collapsed.
Ugh, that must have
The
been
good
just
thing
such
is
a
it was
brutal
terrible,
time.
but I learned 2 really, really good lessons that I carried with me for the rest of my life that have been helpful in every other business we've ever done. So,
What were the two
Every
lessons?
every failure becomes a success. Never get too wrapped up in one customer, and always, always, always have enough cash set aside to take care of your business if something happens. That's a big one.
I think of my friend Hal Denbar, who has a company that's in the pool service business, and he, like you, started a business with the ambition to, I'm going to build this big business, I'm going to get myself out of it, and I won't be actually servicing the customers. And he found himself 4 or 5 years into the business, and he was still in the truck. He was still actually servicing it. For you, with the landscaping business, how long did it take you to get yourself out of actual fulfilling the work, or was that something that you hired people right from the get-go? What was that process like?
Every new business owner has to wear every hat in his business, right? So that's not something you can do automatically. But what we teach people, what I've always done is, instead of making money and then using it to increase my lifestyle, I make money and I use it to hire other people to do the jobs within the business that frees my time up. And if I can delay gratify moving my lifestyle up or buying nice things or nice cars or whatever, and I can put a solid staff in place by spending all the money I've got to get them, then that frees me to build that business even bigger, make even more money, and then create the lifestyle that I intended to create when I started the business. Too many people start a business to create a lifestyle, and much like your friend, they never create the lifestyle because they use all the money they've got just to live.
Yeah. Now, I want to ask about the client concentration issue because, I've talked to a lot of business owners that have this type of challenge, and they never set out to have such deep client concentration, 50, 80% of their revenue coming from the client. But what ends up happening is just they have one client that keeps on hiring them for more and more and more until it grows and grows and grows. And back when I was an attorney practicing law with my own boutique practice, I swear, I confess there were times when I had the same problem. I had one client that was the majority of my revenue. So what is your advice to the clients you work with now that find themselves with that type of problem?
So the challenge here is that in order for you to get out of that relationship, you've got to bring somebody else in that can handle that client. The ego problem with most entrepreneurs is that they say, well, if I bring somebody in, they're not going to be good enough. They're not going to be as good as me. They're not going to be as fast as me. And they're not going to do a good as job of me. So I have to handle it. That's the attitude that will keep you locked into a concentration of a client. You've got to understand that in order for you to branch out and grow and solidify and create a safety net for yourself, you're going to have to bring people into your organization that are not as good as you. They're never going to do as good a job as you. And that's something you have to be okay with. And then you build the organization around that. I always like to say, bring somebody in who's 70 to 80% as good, and you got a home run. Then you let them fail, you let them learn, and you allow your business to expand and get you out of those tasks. It's tough
Mm.
to do sometimes, but you got to do it. You got to do it if you want to grow.
So it was the mid 90s when this company failed. How did you pick yourself up back up and while at the same time having a child that needed open heart surgery?
I didn't have a choice. And I had a child that needed open heart surgery, and I had a wife at home, and I had to eat. I didn't have any money. I didn't have anybody that was supporting me. I didn't have any help. You don't have any choice. So we sold everything down to me, a truck, and a shovel. And I went back out and started digging holes and mowing grass again.
Mm.
Fortunately, a friend came along and said, hey, why don't you start selling insurance with me? And I'm like, can I do it at night? And he said, yeah. So I was doing landscaping during the day and selling insurance at night. And within 6 weeks, I was making more money selling insurance at night than I was landscaping all day. And so I quit landscaping. And 6 weeks later, I was half the revenue in this agency I worked for. So I quit, started my own agency.
Hmm.
Success is a progression all the time. Almost every business, success is a progression. You start one place, you end up another. Whether
Hmm.
it's a different product or a different process, success is a progression. And then a year and a half after I started that insurance agency, I had somehow developed this what we call today a direct to consumer call center. I just called it a virtual sales center back then. And this was the dawn of the internet in 1999, and there were two big companies trying to sell insurance online, and one of them bought me. And so
Hmm.
now all of a sudden I got bought by a venture capital group, having no idea what I was doing, and went to work for these guys. And then we went on, and that company went public, and we developed a enrollment platform that's still used today. And I did two other companies after that into venture capital and private equity, and it's a progression, man.
How was it for you going from running your own shop to being acquired and going to work for another entity because, of course, many entrepreneurs can't handle that.
Yeah, yeah. Day one, I showed up. They moved us down to the Georgia Tech campus into this accelerator type program they had down there. And day one, I showed up. And by the way, I had a big office with a TV in the corner and a bar on the back wall. And, I'd prop my feet up and watch TV. I loved Shania Twain back then and pour myself. I get acquired by these folks. They send me down to Georgia Tech and they put me in a 2x2 cubicle
Oof.
and then demoted me and told me I wasn't qualified to run my own business anymore. Thanks for
Oh,
building it, but you're not qualified to run it. We're bringing
oh,
in a young, sharp MBA.
oh man.
You're just going to be a manager now.
Oh,
That was tough.
did
That
you have a
was
good
tough.
agreement that got you out? Or, then oftentimes that's when people dust off the agreement and say, what is my out here?
I lasted 9 months, but in the process of time, we developed a software platform we went out and sold and built a whole nother division for this company. But after about 9 months, they still weren't going to let me do what I do. And so I did dust off my agreement. I called my lawyer and said, let's buy out my non-compete. And I
Mm.
did and walked away.
So you were able to stay in insurance because you
I
bought
did
out your.
started another company and that one got bought out
Well, that's
by
unusual that a
yeah,
company would allow you to buy out your non-compete because oftentimes they don't want that, right? They want you to they don't want you to be competing with them.
they did. Yeah.
Yeah.
The
Mm.
next one bought out. David Cohen was the lead investor on that one. If you know who he is, there on Sand Hill Road.
Hmm.
That one's still probably powering 9 or 10 states today for the state-based exchange services.
Let
Did
me ask
another
you
one where,
this. Let me ask you this. So you go from, in the matter of like a couple months, from selling to landscaping services to large general contractors, and
Mhm.
it's a very different type of sale to selling insurance. Again, very different type of sale. Why do you think that you were able to make such a massive pivot to a very different type of industry, very different type of buyer?
And then went to selling software. And I will tell
Another change.
yeah, and I have this third book I just wrote, The Psychology of Sales and Negotiation, right?
Uh-huh.
Sales is about psychology. Product knowledge is not as important as understanding the client and the buying process. So, for instance, I knew nothing about software, absolutely nothing. But we had a CTO that worked with me, and I did the talking, and he sat beside me. And when they would ask me a question I'd understand, I would literally just look at him, and he would start talking. And then when he was done talking, I would start talking again. So it's a process of understanding what the buyer wants, what the buyer's looking for. It really doesn't matter what the product is. Some people may not believe that, but I'm telling you, a good salesperson can sell about anything.
Yeah. Um, Talk to me about how you end up in the restaurant business, which is famous for thin margins and
hmm
difficult to succeed in.
Sure, it's a cliche though. How many professional athletes, business people, that make a lot of money, and the first thing they do is they go buy a restaurant. I mean,
Right.
they're all over the place. Well, that was the
Mhm.
first thing I did. I used to take all my employees out for a happy hour, probably 3 or 4 times a week. And after I sold the companies, uh, one of my employees said, we come here all the time. Why don't you buy the place? I said, that's a good idea. So I bought it and I lost money the first year and about 50 grand. So I sold it and bought four more because that's what you do. You quadrupled down on your failures.
Well, so tell me then, how did you avoid losing money on the subsequent four, or did you avoid losing money on the subsequent four?
No, the next four made a hell of a lot of money. But
Okay, so
at
what was
that
the
point, I,
difference then between the
at
first
that,
and the
well,
second?
in that year that I lost money, the first 6 months, didn't really care. I used it as a toy. I was getting up on stage with the band on the weekends. But after a year, I'm like, I'm losing money. I need to figure out why. So I started analyzing why I was losing money, only to realize that the business I was in wasn't probably capable of making money, a lot of different reasons. But then when the broker came to me with these other four restaurants, it was like a small chain, and asked me if I wanted to buy them. The first thing I did is went back into business mode and pulled their P&Ls down, tore them apart based on the experience I'd had and what I'd learned in the past year. I realized that these were four very profitable restaurants. But what we had was, and this is one of my sayings, we had a distressed owner, not a
Mm,
distressed business. And a
mm.
distressed owner is someone who's personally in trouble who needs to get out, but has a good business behind them. And so we found a distressed owner. We bought his four restaurants out, and they made a crap load of money.
Why do
And
you think those four restaurants were as profitable as they were? Is there something you can point to?
They'd been around over 30 years. So one of the things we know in the restaurant business is you're either a destination or you're a brand. And if you're not a destination or a brand, you have a very small chance of success. Restaurants have an 80% failure rate in the first 5 years,
Hmm.
60% in the first two, right?
Hmm.
They were a brand at this point. When you've been around for 35 years, you're a brand. And so
Hmm.
we didn't have to do marketing. Everybody knew who it was.
So that's the primary reason then. Interesting. And
Yep.
yeah, it's funny because a lot of times when I interview entrepreneurs who've been in a bunch of different industries, they go the opposite direction. Restaurants has all these constraints. You have a huge staff you need to employ, of labor that comes and goes. You've got perishables. You've got fluctuations, where it's busy in the evening and it's not busy during the day. You got all these different challenges, and a lot of times they'll gravitate towards something like software or something like insurance that you can sell once and get paid over and over again. And you kind
Mhm.
of went the opposite direction. um,
The restaurants are fun. I like to go sit at the bar and drink and eat for free. I used to joke when I started doing it, I wanted to be 20 minutes to the closest place I could eat and drink for free. So I started buying them, in this pinwheel pattern.
yeah, yeah.
No
And
other reason.
oh, that's that's good reason. I mean, if they're profitable, then that helps a lot, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm probably going to sell out of the restaurant business sometime next year. I got a couple under construction right now. When they get done, I think I've run my course in restaurants. It's been 13 years now, so
Yeah.
I'll probably
Now
sell them.
you also, I love this too. Talk about lifestyle design. You've got real estate properties and you need to fly between them. And so you have a plane, a Cirrus 22, I think you said it was, which is this
20, yeah.
20, which is this beautiful plane that has a parachute built into it, which is
Yep.
phenomenal, really kind of groundbreaking technology. It's really cool. There's some YouTube videos if you want to go check those out. Um, hopefully it never gets used, of course. So tell me about that evolution, like how you made that determination or decision. Did the plane come first? Did the real estate investments come first?
Now I've owned planes for years. I just got into the real estate business a few years ago, and I already had a place on Clearwater Beach. My daughter lives down in Tampa. My mom lives in Tampa, and I live in Atlanta. So I needed to divest out of the stock market. I had a lot of money in the stock market, and you've seen what it's done in the last couple of years. It's been nuts. And I studied for probably 6 months or so the real estate industry, and kind of picked somebody that I wanted to kind of follow what they were doing. And so since I had the place on Clearwater Beach, and I will probably end up in Tampa, I figured I'd start building real estate portfolio in Tampa. So I started buying rental properties down there. Well, while at the same time, I've got 21 of them now. My rental properties are a business, and my plane is a business because I do a lease back to a flight school as well. So if I'm using my plane, which is a business, to fly down to Florida, which is where my real estate business is, then it's a tax write-off. So I can fly back and forth to the beach as long as I'm on business and write the plane off.
Now
In fact, I
I have
just did a reel on that, did 3 million views and probably 20,000 comments, and 19,000 people are like, "You can't do that." Well, yeah, you
I
can.
might have watched that one because I've read about this a couple times before. So is it truly would you say it's profitable? I mean, that kind of blows our minds here because
No,
everything I've been
it's not.
told is that planes are very expensive.
It's not profitable as in I'm doing it to make a ton of money that I'm going to live on. But if I have to travel anyway and I can do it private and I can lease the plane back to a flight school, which covers all of my overhead, all my maintenance, all my everything, including my own flight hours, and I can fly for free, which is what I call it. I mean, if you want to get super technical, it's not free, but it is to me because somebody else is paying for me to do it. Then that's a good deal. And plus, I
Yeah.
got the tax write off on the airplane when I did advanced depreciation on it. And then I'll probably upgrade that plane every 2 to 3 years, which is what I do. So you're always
Mhm.
getting a more expensive plane.
Have
Uh,
you done the math on it? Like, does it work out to the equivalent of like an economy plane flight between where you want to go or
if well, my plane's $435 an hour to fly if somebody's paying for it.
hmm,
But because I lease it out, I make a profit on the plane. I fly my hours for free.
got it?
So
Okay.
it's
So
free for me to fly because somebody else rents my plane, pays me a profit. I use that profit to do my flights.
wow, that's amazing. Um, I want to ask you about COVID because you owned restaurants going into
Hmm.
COVID.
Yep.
Take me back to March of 2020. I'm not sure how many restaurants you had at this point. If it was 4, 7, whatever,
We
but
had six,
you had
and one of them we had
6.
just spent $1 million to open 3 months earlier, and
Ah,
boom, they shut us down. We had to lay off 150 employees in one day. It was devastating. I mean, we had if anybody who runs a business knows that you work off accounts receivable and accounts payable, right? So
yeah.
we probably have 4 weeks of accounts payable sitting out there, which in our case was over $400,000. And you pay your accounts payable off your current cash flow. That's just the way businesses operate. Well, when cash flow gets cut off in one day and you still got $400,000 of accounts payable and you got another $100,000 of payroll that you have to make in the next 2 weeks, and then rent, we were paying $80,000 a month in rent on all of our restaurants. That wasn't
Well,
going away. Utilities
mm-hmm.
wasn't going away,
Mm-hmm.
so it was devastating. It was a scary time. I mean, we didn't know what the hell we were going to do. As much as I'm not a fan of big government, I will be the first to tell you that the PPP loans saved our company, saved our jobs, saved our employees, saved our restaurants
I
without
think those
question.
PPP loans kind of cut across political lines.
Yeah, without
Yeah.
question, that saved our
Yeah.
ass.
Yeah. So you end up having to lay people off. Did you pivot into, restaurant delivery or anything like that? What did you do?
There's no money in restaurant delivery, the kind of restaurants we do. Fortunately, again, back to the lessons we learned, we have no debt. So we didn't have to service any debt on this stuff. We were able to go in and negotiate with our landlords to try to get rent abatements done, which we did. We told all of our suppliers that we're sorry, we're in the same boat you are. And then one of the things we did when we got that first PPP loan is the very first thing I did is I went and paid every single one of my suppliers every dollar we owed them
Really?
because I wanted them to go, hey, this guy took care of us. He didn't take, he didn't go do anything else stupid. So we had structured a business properly that we did not get in trouble. But a lot of companies did. A lot of 4 out of 10 restaurants in our little town went under.
Yeah, it was
It was
just
a big washout.
everywhere for sure. It was a lot of different. And so did some of those restaurants not survive of the 6 that you had?
Sure, like my place over in Johns Creek, there's us and 2 others. The other 2 collapsed.
Mm,
We were able to survive because we were in a position to do that. And then when COVID was over, our sales in that location went up 60% because we
yeah.
were able to pull the clients from those other locations that didn't make it. So in that respect, weird enough to say, COVID actually did that business a favor, or
I've
those poor owners did that business a favor.
right. It's actually there's a lot of people that say that, they say like, it was awful at the time. Definitely a lot of bad that came from it. But then, I think naturally we're wired to look to the silver lining of
Hmm.
that experience. Yeah.
Yeah, and we lost one of our restaurants; it never reopened.
Hmm.
But then, a couple other ones did really well. So
Yeah. Or the really interesting thing is sometimes restaurant chains were diversified and they didn't realize they were diversified. For example, I interviewed someone, this was maybe a year into COVID, who had a restaurant chain mostly around Manhattan. And they had about 15 locations, call it. The vast majority, like let's say like 10 of them were in downtown Manhattan, and they were the wildly profitable ones. And then a couple of months or a year before COVID, they'd opened a couple in the suburbs, which didn't do hardly any business. And then as soon
mhm.
as COVID happened, it flipped because everyone went to the suburbs and no one was in downtown. Right. And so the ones downtown were not doing well at all. And the ones in the suburbs were the ones that saved their butt, and they ended up surviving because they diversified in a way that they never would have anticipated that
Yeah,
was diversification. Right.
didn't even know. Yeah, lessons
No.
we learned that we don't even know.
Right. Exactly. So, I mean, I guess the lessons are, right, like find different ways to build a business that has different revenue streams, even if it's not the most profitable. And I think of like, direct to consumer companies out there that have 99% of their business comes from Amazon. And then they're completely indebted to them, just like, you were dependent on the big construction client early on.
Yep, 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 yep.
Yeah.
That's fact.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to wrap things up. We're almost out of time here. I want to ask you about I have well, first of all, I forgot to ask you about Necker. Well, I previewed it in the beginning, so we have to ask you about Necker
Yes.
Island. So you just got back from Necker Island, which is Richard Branson's place, island that he's owned for 40 years, the British Virgin Islands. Actually, a mentor of mine, Dan Leonello, was coincidentally was on the same trip with you.
Yep. Hung out
Tell
with
us about
Dan.
that. It's on my bucket list, so I'm hoping to make
Yep.
it there someday. What was it like for you?
Phenomenal. I've sailed around Necker many times, been to the BVI many times, always wanted to go. Top four people I've ever wanted to meet in my life. One of them was Richard Branson. So not only get to meet him, spent every day with him, breakfast, lunch, got to spend about 45 minutes in a one-on-one discussion about politics and world events and his views and my views. We didn't agree on everything. Sorry, Richard. But it was awesome talking to him, and just you're talking to a guy that that was hanging out with Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu, and hangs out with the Queen of England, and just the 12 elders of the world. Most people don't even know they're elders of the world, and he's built a temple there where the elders meet, and the things that he's done, the experiences, I mean, it's just is friggin' awesome. Plus, he lives in paradise. I mean, my goodness, it's paradise.
Yeah, it's amazing, and I've seen many videos of him around the island, and it's just really unbelievable.
Let me
Yeah.
tell you something. One of the things he said that struck me really hard. We were talking one night, and I said, Richard, I sold my companies, like my big companies, 15 years ago, and I took a few years where I had no motivation. I didn't want to do anything. I didn't have any ambition. I said, you're 73 years old. We were there on his birthday. I said, you're 73 years old, and you have like 100 companies that you still run underneath you. Why do you still do this? Why do you go forward?
What drives him? Yeah.
And he said, Brian, he said, first, let me ask you this. Have you got your motivation back? And I said, yeah, I have. It's a little different than it is today. I'm not actually just trying to make money like I was, but yes. He said, here's the thing. If you have a talent or an ability that you can use, and that includes business in making money, and if you can take that talent and ability and you can use it to make the world a better place, then you have an obligation to do that for the rest of your life and not just sit back and take what the world gave you.
Wow.
Wow. I mean, that's just a jaw dropper right there.
Right. And that you're going
So
to take that with you for the rest of your life. That
I'm going to
statement.
tell that story on every podcast for the next 2 years.
Yeah, for sure. Wow, what an amazing experience. Now, let's think back to, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, your business is failing, your child needs open heart surgery, you would have killed for $100, $1,000 in your bank account at that moment in time. This is again
Mhm.
before you discover insurance.
Yep.
Now, buying a ticket to that island is not cheap to go hang out there. It's a lot of money.
No, it's a lot of money. Yeah.
And I think even though you've got your own plane now, you own restaurants, stuff like that, even you probably hesitated before you wrote that check, or part of you hesitated, or maybe it didn't. I don't know. But what was your thought process like before you made that decision to spend thousands of dollars to go for less than a week to hang out there?
It was a bucket list item for me, John. And I've reached this point in my life where bucket list items are more important to me than having some cash in the bank. So when my friend Tanya called and she said, we're going to go do this, you need to go. I said, where do I sign? And I wired the money that day. Not even hesitation. There's some things in life you need to do if you're going to grow, be a better person, be more successful. And if you get the opportunity to hang out with super successful people, like your mentor, Dan, my friend Tanya, with Richard Branson, if you get that opportunity, money can't be an issue, because there's no way that saving that a little amount of money and leaving it in your checking account is going to be better than the experience you got and the lessons you're going to learn hanging around those kind of people. I honestly, I can't stress that enough.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's so
Experiences,
far.
mentorship, and coaching is just the best thing you can ever do for yourself in life.
Yeah, that's so powerful. I have to ask who the other three people on your list are, the three other people that you want to meet.
Yeah, so it was Richard Branson because I've read all his books. My last book on sales is based on one of the things he says, which is if your first offer doesn't insult them, then you offered too much.
Hmm.
That's one of his famous things, and so that's where the
Mm-hmm.
thing no comes from. Elon Musk is one of my guys that I have to meet. I've been to SpaceX. I've been in mission control. Yeah, I've been in mission control when
Yeah.
I got a hook up politically. We got to go in and do a back thing tour. I've
Yeah.
been to the Boring Company. I mean, I'm on my fourth Tesla. I've drank the Kool-Aid. I'm a believer, right?
Yeah. Afterwards, I'll
He's
tell
gonna
you my story of meeting him.
he's gonna change the world, and I need to meet
Yeah.
him. So if anybody out there in your land can give me a meeting, even a hello, I will fly anywhere, do anything. I'm in.
Okay,
Uh,
got it.
the other two are Kenny Chesney, who is my favorite musician artist.
Okay.
I just love his music. And for 18 years, and I stopped watching football when he retired. When for 18 years, I was a Peyton Mann
Peyton
super
Manning
fan.
fan. Uh-huh.
So I want to meet Peyton Manning.
Okay,
Peyton
that's
Manning,
cool.
Kenny Chesney, Kenny, who's been on Richard Branson's island, by the way. He has a place nearby,
Oh, well,
and
cool.
Elon. So those are the next three. So if anybody
That's a
knows them, I'm here.
that's a good list. That's a good list. Well, this has been great. I want to wrap up with the question I was asked, which is my gratitude question. I'm a big fan of gratitude, especially expressing gratitude to those who helped you along the way. Business partners, mentors, peers, contemporaries. You mentioned Tanya and you mentioned others here. Who would you want to thank?
My very first mentor, he was a business partner. We were broke. He came to me and offered me equity in his company if I would let him work out of my back offices. I had an insurance agency. This was pre-sale, and I said sure. So he gave me equity in his internet company, and he threw in a $500,000 and he said, I'm going to fund a $500,000. He'd already made like $20 million. He was wealthy. He said, I'm going to throw in a $500,000. You're going to pay it back if you make money. I'll pay it back if we make money. 9 months later, my CPA came to me and told me he's blown the entire 500,000. It's gone. You need to shut that thing down. It's going to bankrupt you. I was freaking out, man. I didn't have any money. I was talking to my wife. I'm stressed. Steve comes in my office the next day and Steve says, hey, man, we're going to throw another $66,000 into the company so we can buy some more servers. And I said, Steve, we haven't made any money. I can't do this. I don't want to take on any more debt. I'm freaking out. I'm just like, my mindset is so small. I just don't get it. He said, that's going to work. Listen, trust me. I've done this before. I know what I'm doing. This is going to work. I said, yeah, but it's not working. It's not working, Steve. And I'm freaking out. He said, Brian, listen to me. It's going to work. Trust me. I've done this before. It's going to work. I said, but Steve. And he said, all right, here's your deal. You give me my equity back. You can walk away and you owe me nothing right now, but I want a decision right now. Give me my equity. You walk away. You owe me nothing. I don't want money to come between our friendship, but tell me now. And I sat there staring at him. And this is a guy that I'd been following now for about a year, watching the way he dealt with people and business. He was an amazing person and things I was learning. And finally had a mental breakdown, a mental breakthrough, we'll call it. And I said, you know what, Steve? You're worth 20 million. I'm worth $20. If I'm going down, I'm going down with you. So I'm in.
Hmm.
And he said, all right, I never want to hear that again. And 18 months later, we sold that company for $80 million.
Wow.
And I almost walked away.
Wow.
And that's when I
Amazing.
said, you know what? I need to listen to my mentors. They've been there, they've done that, they know what they're talking about. And this is why I tell people all the time, listen to people who know what they're talking about. Check
Hmm.
your ego.
Yeah. What a great
Steve's my
story.
man. Steve just passed away recently. He changed my life, my family's life, my children's life, my grandchildren's life. He changed it all.
Amazing. Amazing story. Brian, this has been really great. Where can people go to learn more about you, connect with you, and learn about your work?
Sure, brianwillmedia.com. Brianwillmedia.com. My podcast, my books, my coaching programs, everything's on there.
Excellent. And follow him on LinkedIn as well. We'll link that up in the show notes because you share a lot of great content on there as well. Brian, thank you so much for your time and for your service.
John, this was awesome. Thank you for having me.